And so one of the things in that was in an earlier interview. There was one that was just a couple of hours ago, I believe, it was posted anyway in there, also with Jack Keane. Now, in this one, I think that he is growing more desperate because it's not just enough to suggest that we delink. I think now that he's trying to put this narrative out there that says, hey, these both the Iranians and the Lebanese, the Hezbollah Lebanese, are basically evil actors and they're terrible and you can't trust them. And so he resorts to outright lies.
It's the Hezbollah who have been attacking ever since we had the first ceasefire on April the 17th. That's when they began. The ceasefire was April the 17th, and they continue to attack. They've attacked every day except for the last 24 hours. And that is pitting the rows. Israel is reacting to their attacking.
So he's saying that Israel's not doing anything. They're just sitting there trying to be good neighbors. And bam, these guys, when we go into a ceasefire, this is what he's saying. We go into a ceasefire, President Trump, to his credit, negotiates this, and then darn it, here they come. That is knowingly lie. He is not exaggerating. He is intentionally deceiving the American public. Let's just take a look at a couple of things here. This is on the 7th of April. President Trump announces the Iran ceasefire ahead of an 8 p.m. deadline. So it's basically, in our time, going to take effect on the 8th of April. On the 8th of April, Israel strikes busy commercial residential areas in central Beirut without warning, hours after a ceasefire was announced by the U.S. Lebanon said at least 182 people were killed and hundreds were wounded, making it the deadliest day in the Israeli-Lebanese war, and everything has continued on since that time. President Trump put the ceasefire. That ceasefire specifically said it had to be Lebanon, and immediately Israel went in and sabotaged that. And now then Jack Keane wants to flip it around and say not only was it not the Israeli side that attacked, it was Hezbollah that attacked on the 17th. I don't know where he got that number from, but it was clearly on the 8th, and it was initiated by the Israeli side, point blank, period.
Yeah, it's a no-brainer. I mean, we also it's too many headlines you could pull up to prove that. So, like, Jack Keane is in the tank for whoever's paying his whatever think tank or
It's
who knows,
disgusting.
but the MEK or whoever he's working for this week. But the fact that Fox keeps him on as a regular pundit really says a lot about Fox News. They've really just they've defaulted to their own Iraq war sort of era propaganda mode. But look, the framework in which Jack Keane is describing things in Lebanon is so bogus. It's just beyond belief. I mean, he's saying that Hezbollah attacking Israeli soldiers on Lebanese territory is somehow a violation of a ceasefire. Israel invaded, occupied, and are massacring Lebanese, and they're not allowed to defend themselves. And that's kind of that arrogant kind of, and this is the Israeli line. The Hezbollah needs to stop their aggression. It's terrorism when they attack IDF soldiers on Lebanese territory. I mean, they really push this in this way that they're trying to impose this frame on the Western public, especially in America, and a lot of them believe it because this is one of the sort of fundamental problems with this whole conversation. And I know this is a big stumbling block, but I'm going to say it, and it's very unpopular, but it's actually real. This is one of the impediments to getting a negotiated settlement for the region, is this insistence on classifying Hezbollah as a terrorist group, which comes from Israel, the U.S., and a few of its allies only. The rest of the world does not recognize them as such. But this insistence to do that means that you then it's weapons free. It's carte blanche. You can do what you want. You can do collateral damage. You can hit them wherever they are, even if you're in their territory, in Lebanese territory, and you can hit them while they're in Lebanese territory. They can't defend their homeland. They can't defend their villages because they've been labeled as such and not a resistance organization, an armed resistance organization, and that's why they were founded. So while this is like a really difficult problem to tease out because it's the legal problem, because it's U.S. law and Britain's adopted it, the Israeli lobby is the reason why that designation exists. By the way, this is the reason why the Israeli lobby exists, is to do things like this, because that is one of Israel's the people opposing Israeli aggression and occupation are groups like that. And they're not the only one. And that includes the Palestinian resistance groups in the occupied territories. And, we're just so used to. I've even heard Cenk Uygur on the Young Turks, and I respect Cenk a lot, but he was like, no, a terrorist group, Hezbollah, he's referring to it as a terrorist group. So he's aping Israeli talking points. And he's saying that Hezbollah, blew up the Marine barracks in 1983. And, that's a very contestable point of history because Hezbollah did not form officially until 1985. 2 years later, they didn't read the manifesto until 1985. And there's a lot of controversy over the Islamic Jihad took credit for it, but then the U.S. retrospectively through the CIA doing their sort of magical reports somehow said that the Islamic Jihad was a secret, undeclared future Hezbollah cell. Therefore, we're going to retroactively label them as Hezbollah. And they used this in order to, there's a lot of Iranian frozen assets. This is an interesting footnote, Danny. There's a lot of Iranian frozen assets, billions of dollars, and the families, the victims of the Marine, families of the Marine barracks bombing tried to, through and successfully through U.S. Federal court in a civil case to sue the Iranian government. And this was really a lawfare job to grab frozen assets, including they tried from the Iranian central bank, 1.5 billion and 2 billion to different sums. And by doing that, they had to conjure and create a case that Hezbollah was responsible for the 1983 Marine barracks bombing, even though they didn't exist as an organization at the time. But it's all done retrospectively. And so why I'm saying that is this is important history. This is very important history because, the whole basis of the Israeli invasion from the previous Lebanese civil war was based on a completely fake claim that the PLO, or a Palestinian group, attempted to assassinate an Israeli, I believe, an ambassador to Britain at the time, and I think his name was Shlomo Agrov, and it was proven to be false. But that was they rolled into Lebanon, and the rest is history. And it was based on a completely fake pretext to fight what Israel called the PLO terror threat in Lebanon. And there was no, the PLO posed no threat to Israel from Lebanon. They abided by all the ceasefires and UN mandates. You can check the history, but Israel claimed that they didn't. Isn't this amazing how history repeats itself? Now it's this terrorist threat now, Hezbollah, who's abiding by all of the ceasefires. Israel broke the ceasefire 15,000 times, this last one. And by the way, after October 7th, here's an interesting footnote. Israel claimed that Hezbollah attacked Israel on October 8th, and that started this rounds of conflict, right? And what was the claim? That they attacked Israel. Is what Hezbollah fired a rocket against on October 8th were IDF positions, not in Israel, in land occupied by, illegally occupied, according to the UN resolution, in the Sheba Farms, which is in itself contested between Lebanon and Syria. That's a different story, different debate. But that's where the IDF position was. So they didn't strike the people of northern Israel. And then Israel came all guns blazing after that. And once that tit for tat begins, you can't then, say that, there's war at that point. And Israel initiated it because they have no right to be in a Lebanese territory. One of Hezbollah's, on their manifesto, on their mission statement, very clear to liberate all of occupied Lebanese lands. There are no less than 13 slices of land that have been stolen by Israel after they were supposed to withdraw in 2000. And this is what you might call the UN blue line. There's a term for it, the blue line. Okay. Yeah. And we had UNIFIL, we had UNDOF forces there. Israel's pushed all of those out. They fired at them, they attacked them, they harassed them, and now they're not there to monitor the situation. So that check, the international check, is gone. Israeli drove them out for a reason, because they were planning to invade and occupy again South Lebanon. And just like in 1982, they had a 20 when they promised a 25-mile buffer zone, and of course they went past that. They went past that because they said that they needed extra space after the Litani River so they could provide. They're concerned about their quote security, and the U.S. deployed. Ronald Reagan deployed international forces during that. Okay, that was to stabilize the situation, and guess what? The IDF harassed U.S. soldiers and officers with airplanes, boats, ground infantry, and absolutely made their life hell. Israel did not want U.S. troops in Lebanon. I think Menachem Begin was the prime minister at the time. He was so against Reagan intervening because he said, this is not your business. This is not your business. They were totally against it. They completely railroaded and sabotaged Reagan's peace initiative. Ronald Reagan was trying to create a framework for peace for the region. Does this sound familiar? I mean, what we're looking at now, it's funny how this history rhymes so coherently. It's unbelievable. And my point of this, Danny, is that the Israeli behavior and characteristics in these situations, especially with Lebanon, has not changed at all. They're very consistent.
Yeah. And in fact, that's actually what I want to look at. We just took a look at U.S. side / Jack Keane. I don't know if I should give him credit for being on the U.S. side, but he's a U.S. voice. Let's take a look at a couple of Israeli voices and then one from Hezbollah itself. First of all, here is the Minister of Defense, Israel Katz, who just says flat out, this is just yesterday, Israel will not withdraw from the security zone in Lebanon. Whatever President Trump said, there's no way we're going to do that. That was one thing, but it's another thing for the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who also very strongly weighed in on the topic yesterday.
In Lebanon, we exploded, I don't know if to call this the beepers or the pagers. What do you use in America? Beepers. We exploded the beepers. We took out Nasrallah. We decimated Hezbollah's military machine. We prevented the Ridwan force from invading the Galilee. We destroyed over 90% of the 150,000 rockets and missiles that Hezbollah amassed against us. We established a security zone in Gaza. We established a security zone in Syria. We established a security zone in Lebanon, and we shall keep it as long as is necessary to protect our people.
Well, I mean, he's flat out saying it there. Just like we established a security zone in other countries, we're never giving those back, and we're never going to give this back here. And then this odd thing where this whole long line of things over multiple years where they brag about assassinating and killing all these people in Lebanon, throughout the country. And I'm not sure about that one. Maybe you can weigh in on this, what he's talking about when he's claiming anyway that Hezbollah was going to attack in the Galilee area. I don't know what he's talking about with that, but everything else, all of this has to be viewed in terms of President Trump. Was it about a week ago, was interviewed by Axios, and they asked him, can you put Israel in a box on Lebanon? He says, yeah, I can. They respect me and they'll do what I say. And he said that on Lebanon, that Netanyahu needs to be a little more sane, right? That's yesterday. You saw the Israel Katz's comment. Who's running who here?
That's, Donald Trump doesn't know what he's talking about. He's like, oh, they need to be a little bit saying Bibi's killed too many people. They've been killing too much. He said a couple of mildly intelligent things about not taking down apartment blocks because not everybody in the apartment block is Hezbollah. How about nobody in the apartment block is Hezbollah? But anyway, we give Donald some points for that. That's just a bit of common sense. Yeah. So congratulations, participation medal for the president on that conversation. But he doesn't fundamentally, if he does, he's not saying it, but the Israelis are committed to expansion. Look next door, the Golan Heights. Trump himself gave them the keys to the Golan Heights, which was totally illegal against international law. He did it in his first term, and he reiterated it in his second term. And so that's occupying the most strategic high ground in the region, really, and Mount Hermon. That's Syrian sovereign territory, by the way. It's not even, wasn't even contested until we helped to take down the Assad government in Damascus. And look what you've got now. But there should be no ambiguity about what Israel's designs are. They view the Golan Heights in Syria as their strategic birthright to protect the state of Israel, and they will eventually formalize that. They'll put settlements there. I mean, have we not seen this before? And the same with eventually with Lebanon, although it'll probably take longer and there'll be resistance to it. There's no resistance in Syria. They've probably paid off the al-Sharar government, or he's just happy to have like made the career transition from head chopper to head of state. You know, he's probably just chuffed to have the job, and he's really not going to apply much resistance there. But Lebanon's a different story. There's going to be resistance there. The Lebanese army is not going to disarm Hezbollah. It's not going to happen. You know, it's interesting. The longer this goes on, that it's so obvious that Israel is massacring Lebanese. They're in violation of every single international law or treaty in the history of the international system. They are the terrorists. That let's not mince words. What Israel's doing, flying drones over Beirut, terrorizing the population, targeting and killing journalists, multiple journalists, targeting ambulances, double tapping aid workers, flattening villages and telling people to leave or you're going to die. How does that fall under the definition of terrorism? It's state terrorism, but it's terrorism nonetheless. And for the J.D. Vances of the world and Trump and so forth to pretend that like we're aligned with Israel, but sometimes our interests diverge. No, you've got CENTCOM and running joint command centers with the IDF. You know, you're supplying every single bomb and F-35 and every single practical, almost every heavy weaponry to Israel that they're using right now to commit war crimes in Lebanon. There's no compunction in Washington at all to restrain Israel. They don't see themselves as directly involved in the conflict. That's just ludicrous. They're absolutely part and parcel of this. They can't separate themselves from it, but they're doing it because they can kind of get away with it because the United States media is not going to press too hard on that point. But this is the problem. They say they're not. You can say, Vance can say, look, nobody's supporting Israel. They're very unpopular now. BB should stop saying bad things about Trump. How about you stop providing JDAM bombs to the Israelis? They're massacring Lebanese civilians. They're taking out city blocks. They're terrorizing the Lebanese population, and then they're wiping out. They're hitting world heritage, the most beautiful and formerly protected historic sites in the world, in Tyre and Sur, and all of these pristine coastline. Israel's just laying waste to it. You know, where's the pushback? Where's the opposition to this in the Trump administration? Until you see that, then it's a serious government. It's a serious presidency.
Fair enough.
Serious presidency. They're still in the pocket of the Israeli lobby, as far as I'm concerned. Otherwise, they would have sort of maybe put their foot down a little bit more seriously on this. I don't see it happening yet.
Yeah, I think that that they're just hoping that these strongly worded statements will result in some actions. But I think the Israeli side sees, yeah, I ain't going to do nothing. I dare you to take action, and so far we haven't. Quick question here. I'm gonna put up what the leader of Hezbollah, I guess the guy that replaced Nasrallah after he was assassinated in 2024. I'm going to show you what he has to say about this in a second, but I'd like your view on something, since I know you've spent some time in Lebanon in the past. If there's obviously a lot of tension, for those who may not know, between the state of Lebanon and Hezbollah. This is odd kind of situation where there is some Hezbollah actually in the parliament, et cetera, but there's still a lot of tension because there's kind of two militaries and they're not exactly, seeing eye to eye on things. But in the event that eventually, through whatever coercion or economic pressure or whatever, that Israel is required to leave and Hezbollah emerges as being seen as the victor, might that not tilt the balance inside of Lebanon more positively toward Hezbollah as opposed to the current Lebanese government? Or might that cause them to actually have to go more toward Hezbollah as opposed to trying to disarm them, which they're allegedly trying to do now?
Certainly, any defeat of Israel, and this is what happened after 2006. It was a huge surge for Hezbollah in terms of their popularity, their credibility, their legitimacy after defeating Israel's humiliating defeat for the IDF. humiliating defeat. And I have walked the battlefield in south near Nabatea and Melite and places like that. So, I've been I've seen I've seen the after effects. I've seen the cluster bombs still laying around. I did a documentary for a Lebanese channel on the cluster bomb situation. Israel dropped millions of cluster bombs all over South Lebanon between 2000 and 2006. Millions unexploded. They look like toys, and kids' hands are getting blown off. The UN has a MAG program to sort of demine them. They asked the Israelis for the sortie maps so they could identify where they were dropped, so they could go and clean them professionally with sappers and all the rest of it. And Israel refused to hand over the data of all their air sorties. That really tells you all you need to know. But just to say that the scars run deep. The scars run deep. You know what else is interesting? This is interesting. The people of South Lebanon, they support Hezbollah even with all the devastation. What does that tell you? That to them, this is their home. That's their village. They're born there. Their family's there. They want to die there. And the only people defending them, who can defend them, who can resist the Israelis, are Hezbollah. Because the Lebanese armed forces, I'll say this again for anybody who might have missed this, but the Lebanese armed forces they can't defend the southern border. Their policy is not to engage with Israel. And there's a reason for that, Danny, too. One is political, because the United States have absolute control over the presidency and the prime minister of Lebanon, the absolute U.S. puppets. I would say the president's a hybrid Saudi, and the prime minister, Saudi's money, U.S. political influence. And behind that, of course, with U.S. political influence, Israeli influence. But the Lebanese army is a jumped-up gendarmerie force. They're not a military. They're not allowed to have an air force. They're not allowed to have air defense. They're not allowed to control their airspace. Israel reserves the right to have total control and impunity over Lebanese airspace, send drones to loiter around Beirut, to buzzing all the time, terrorizing people. They reserve the right to do that because the United States has allowed them to do that, because they prohibit the Lebanese military from purchasing. The U.S. audit every single thing that they buy, and they will not allow them to be a proper military. So why is that? Does that come from Washington? No, that is the Israeli lobbying our congressmen and senators in the White House to make sure that Lebanon cannot have a proper military to defend their country. And there's a reason, because Israel doesn't want that. Because if you had a unified front between the Lebanese armed forces and Hezbollah to defend their southern border, that would bring a whole lot of diplomatic support for Lebanon. A lot of people are connected to Lebanon, but don't support because of the chaos internally. It has not been resolved, and that's by design. The U.S. wants it that way. Israel wants it that way so they can isolate Hezbollah as a, quote, terrorist entity, when in fact they're totally indigenous to South Lebanon. They don't come from Iran. They are Lebanese. And quickly, sure. Danny, understand that the influence from Tel Aviv goes to Washington and comes back to Beirut. That's why you have this situation. When people understand that, this whole thing makes perfect sense. And all of the noise you see with Tom Barak and disarm Hezbollah, it's all political noise. That's the reality, what I just explained.
And let me show you a soundbite here from somebody who is most assuredly not under that thumb and not as part of that, and that is the current leader of Hezbollah.
There is no such thing as a ceasefire that grants Israel freedom of action. A ceasefire means a complete halt of hostilities by air, land, and sea. It means no demolitions, no consolidation of its presence in the occupied areas, no further advances in preparations for the withdrawal, which should take place according to a rapid, time-bound schedule.
So that's in direct contradiction to what Israel Katz and Benjamin Netanyahu just said in the X post and in the soundbite that I just played there. And that is what the Iranian side is saying is necessary to get to all the rest of those points. It's a 14-point agreement. That's point number one. I just showed you that a second ago. So with these diametrically opposed things inside of Lebanon, with the IDF and the Hezbollah there, Patrick, how do we get past this point? How do we get past this point?
There's one very simple way to get past this point is if this these 14 points or this MOU, if it's anchored in international law, then this is a totally different conversation. Israel must withdraw from Lebanese territory, including the 13 contested blue line sites, which they've been occupying illegally. The UN has repeatedly passed resolutions, repeatedly, and Israel's basically thumbed their nose at the US, and America's there to veto anything in the Security Council that might sort of, create problems or offend Israel. So that's the problem. None of the U.S. is trying to do negotiations divorced from international law, because the U.S. is trying to undermine and ultimately destroy, I believe, destroy international legal framework. They've already kind of done this years ago by replacing international law with the quote rules-based international order, which was really kind of a subterfuge to weaken and undermine the international system. And that's the problem here. If you don't respect the sovereign territory of Lebanon, then we're not really good. We have a huge problem, because Israel will just redefine a ceasefire the way it wants. So we'll say, yeah, we need to occupy South Lebanon for security reasons, but we won't fire. But last time we had a ceasefire, Danny, the Israelis were busy planting explosives, destroying Lebanese infrastructure, and then saying that, oh, we're not guilty of breaching the ceasefire because we haven't actually fired any, airstrikes or any artillery, but we did just blow up, sort of 100 structures and wipe out 1,000 homes. But that's not really a breach of the ceasefire. If you want to play these games with the Israelis, which the United States are quite happy to let them do, that's the problem. Washington, if you're going to pull Israel up, you got to pull them up on every single front, because trust me, they have 101 ways to get around a weak kind of enforceable posture by the United States. The U.S. is the only one that can lean on Israel. And until the U.S. proves that it's able to credibly restrain Israel, and within the framework of international law and respect UN resolutions, then we're going to have stalemates. This thing is going to go around in circles. It could be a very, very long, protracted conflict as a result. But the problem is, Danny, if you pull Israel up on UN resolutions, then the U.S. has to be pulled up as well. And that's a problem for Washington. See, we have fundamental structural issues here that are really, it has to do with the hypocrisy of Washington, and it's just the outright criminality, and just this new policy of piracy adopted by the Trump administration. They're not doing themselves any favors, because they're not really credible partners for a serious negotiations. They're suffering for that now. Now they're paying the price for all of these sort of vice and just total abrogation of international law that we've seen over the last 18 months. Now you can see the price of it, and it's severe.